on the run. How far can he go till no one will come? And you're in his way. He'll push you around, 'cause what could you say? And some will endorse him. If only we found a way to win and lock him up. He's pedaling backwards as we're pushing our way back through this world. Let's lock him up. Man on the run. How far can he go till no one will come? And you're in his way as he pushes you down. What could you say? And some will endorse him. We gotta find a way to win and lock him up. He's pedaling backwards. We're pushing our ways back through this world to lock him up. I often wonder why I get a little high every time I see this man run. I often wonder why I get a little high every time I see this man run. Man on the run. How far can he go till no one will come? And some will endorse him. If only we found a way to win and lock him up. He's pedaling backwards, pushing our ways back through this world till we lock him up. And I don't wanna be a stalwart. You said it once, but not direct to me. I'll be there as soon as I can. We wanted more, so we got less. We held it through another test. The headlight leads us on its way. We're sticking to our guns. We've got a chance to make a difference in this life. But I wonder if you're leading me on. And I don't wanna be your back door. You've held me up, and once enough for me. I'll be there as soon as I can. We wanted more, so let's plan less. The other shoe was bound to rest. The headlight leads us on its way. We're sticking to our guns. We've got a chance to make a difference in this life. But I wonder if you're leading me on. And don't you wanna be tired of all these things? Scared of living in the past? And don't you wanna be from all you see. Not scared, it won't last. We're sticking to our guns, we've got a chance to make a difference in this life. But I wonder if you're leading me on. We're sticking to our guns, we've got a chance to make a difference in this life. But I wonder if you're leading me on.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Future Plymouth, our 7th webinar in the series. The title of this webinar is Biodiversity and Carbon Sequestration. We've got 4 amazing guests for you this afternoon, so thanks so much for joining us. My name is Miles Noble. I'm here to take you through the webinar. So first up, we've got Labour MP for Plymouth Sutton and Devonport. He's also the Shadow Environment Secretary, Luke Pollard, and he's here to talk about COP26 and 15 and the urgent action required regarding the climate emergency and biodiversity across the country and focusing on Plymouth and local opportunities. Next, we have Loveday Trinick from the Ocean Conservation Trust, who is live from the National Marine Aquarium, so you'll see some fishes in the background. So she will explain the seagrass and beds within Plymouth Sound and as an opportunity for carbon sequestration locally. And she's also going to talk about the ReMEDIES restoration project as well. And then finally, we have a double act. We have Dr. Thomas Murphy and Dr. Paul Lunt from Plymouth University, who will talk about biodiversity and how it could be physically introduced into buildings design by the use of green walls. And they'll also be discussing energy saving and health-inducing benefits of the distance systems available. So we've got a fantastic programme. So sit back, relax and enjoy. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please stick around for that. If you'd like to get your question in early, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom, or be brave and click on the raise hand button at the end and ask your question directly to the panel. So without any further ado, I'll pass you over to Luke Pollard, MP, who will talk through his talk. Over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Miles. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining this seminar about biodiversity. And it has never been more important, I think, for us to talk about biodiversity. But I'm going to do something a bit odd for a politician. I'm going to start by saying that there are some things that we're getting wrong. And one of those is, I think, the way that we talk about biodiversity and carbon sequestration. Now, if you're on this, it probably means that you have an interest in this area. So biodiversity and sequestering carbon is something you're probably very familiar with. But for lots of people out there, it's not something that they're approaching on an everyday basis. But it's something we need every single person in our city, in our country, to be looking at much more seriously. And that's because we are still in the middle of a climate and ecological crisis. As well as having the complications of Brexit, the confusion that comes out of the implementation of the new Brexit deal, the climate crisis hasn't gone away. The horrors of the pandemic has produced added consequences. The net effect of those 3 crises is that there's no going back to business as usual. So when politicians like me start talking about the future and building back better, a green industrial revolution, a green new deal, I want you, as someone who's interested in this area, to challenge those politicians, whether they're red ones like me or blue ones like the ones we have in power nationally. I want you to be able to challenge them to say, okay, what are you actually doing? Because there is something at the moment that has changed the nature of our debate. And that is the victory of 3-word sound bites over the practical application of the policy. So Build Back Better Green Industrial Revolution, Green New Deal, if it fits in 3-word sound bites, it's the flavour of the month. But it doesn't often have the policy stapled to the back of it. And that's where I think for folks who are interested in this area, we need to make a compelling case in plain English to really change the dial on this area. And that's why when I talk about biodiversity, I want to talk about nature in particular, because probably during the first lockdown, you probably found yourself saying, isn't it great how we can hear the birds sing more? You probably valued walks in the park, or like myself, a swim in the sea. You've probably valued the interactions with our green spaces much more. If you're lucky enough to have a garden attached to your home, you've probably enjoyed that more this year than the past year than you have any year up to that date. But as a city with high levels of deprivation, not everyone has that chance to enjoy that biodiversity, which is the reason why access to green space across our city is so important. That biodiversity needs to be something that we value and we put a value on in the decisions that we take. Now, 2021 is an incredibly important year for our planet, incredibly important for the debate around carbon, but also for the debate around nature and biodiversity. Now, in the Shadow Cabinet, I look after everything green, with the exception of carbon, which is looked after by Ed Miliband. And the debate, when we're having a debate around the environment, we often have a debate around carbon. It's framed with the need to decarbonise our economy. But that debate around carbon can also be somewhat complex. You've probably talked about tons of carbon recently. You've probably studied calculations where they're talking about tons of carbon. But how big is a ton of carbon? If you were to, look at the desk where your laptop or the computer or your phone is at the moment and imagine a ton of carbon on it, how big would that ton of carbon be? That big? That big? That big? How big would it be? Unless you live and breathe the debates around decarbonisation, the whole framing of the debate can seem quite alien to you. A ton of carbon under normal atmospheric pressures is about the size of 2 double-decker buses. So I've been told. Hard to see. So when you're talking about the environment, the need to tackle the climate and ecological crisis urgently, the go-to place for politicians and experts to start from is often tons of carbon. It's often the idea of reducing global temperature emissions to no more than 1.5 degrees. It is suddenly jumps into the realm of science quite early. And if we are to truly tackle this crisis, we need every single person to be able to feel compelled, engaged with that debate. And that's why I think when we talk about nature and biodiversity, it has not only a vital effect on the climate and our planet, protecting vulnerable habitats, protecting precious species, but it also is a route to get more people engaged with this debate. Because if you're fortunate enough to own your own home, you'll be able to afford probably or borrow against your asset to replace your boiler with an air source heat pump, to replace single glazed windows with double glazing or triple glazing, to put external wall insulation or pack your loft with insulation. You might even be able to install an electric vehicle charging point or buy an EV. If you are on minimum wage, living in the private sector in a flat somewhere in Plymouth, for instance, all that agency is not there. You don't make those same decisions. You can't make those same decisions because someone else decides on the heating method of your property. Someone else will decide of the transport nature on your way to work. And that's why nature can be a way of including not only those people who are affluent and who can afford to decarbonize their lifestyles, but those who don't have that same agency to do so. And I think that for me, that's where the excitement around this year can truly be held. Because of course, we need to get a good deal at COP26 that the UK is co-hosting with Italy in Glasgow later this year. We need a global deal on carbon emissions. We need it to go beyond just the greenwash of 3-word sound bites. We need there to be a meaningful reduction in carbon from developed nations, but also a route for developing nations to be able to do so, to jump some of those industrial stages, to be rewarded for doing so, to have an assessment of loss and damage along the way. I think with President Biden in place, and you can imagine that I probably wasn't a huge fan of his orange predecessor, that we've got a real opportunity now to bring the planet together with a clear priority behind an agenda to decarbonize, to actually deliver on it, not just to have the commitments of the Paris climate change agreement put in place and delivered against, but to push further. Now, I'm a net zero by 2030 kind of guy rather than a net zero by 2050, but whatever date you put on there, you're going to need every single business, every single person to be able to do their bit to decarbonize their daily life. And that is where there is a real importance of making sure that the actions that we're taking as a community, as a city, as a country, are deliverable and accessible to all. Of course, big businesses and big governments have a responsibility to lead by example, but we need to find a way of encouraging us all to be able to do a little bit to get there. Now, solving the climate crisis does sometimes feel like it's a problem that's too big for any one person to be able to tackle alone. And as the person who's responsible for animal welfare within the Labour Party, I think I desperately need to find a new phrase, but it's a little bit like, how do you eat an elephant? Don't eat elephants, but how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one mouthful at a time. And that's what we've got to do with addressing the climate and ecological crisis. And I want to talk just for a moment about how we can do that with a biodiversity crisis. Now, we have a choice as a planet. We can either solve the carbon crisis and the ecological crisis simultaneously, or we can solve neither of them. But it's harder on the ecological crisis because it's not one single action. It's protections of a great range of biodiversity in a great range of habitats. It's protection of things that attract public attention, those grand and majestic beasts, elephants, lions and tigers that attract media attention. But it's also protection of insects that rarely does attract the same level of attention. It's about making sure that there's steps forwards at each time. But that's where I think the opportunity to build back better in a genuine way is there. So one thing that certainly those folks that work in architecture on this call will be familiar with is how we can build nature into developments, how we can build it into communities. Because there is a sense, and as someone who used to advise people on how to build skyscrapers and football stadiums before I got elected, I know that when you take a parcel of land, you de-risk it, you take down as many buildings as you can on it to reduce the risk on it. You take away all the trees in case there could be a future risk of TPAs being put on them. You basically remove nature from a site and then you build it back in. But all too often that nature is built in a kind of like controlled and unsympathetic way. I want us to really seize the moment to build nature in a meaningful way. Now, there's some tests for that. And one of the things that I promote in the work when I talk about this on a nationwide basis is Swift bricks. You probably know what a Swift brick is, but if you don't, it's like a breeze block with a hole in that the swifts, those wonderful little birds, make their nests in. You build it into a new building. So you're designing nature actually into it. Now, this is not because we need to have a massive revival of the swift population across the country, although we do. Installing Swift bricks is an example in my mind of how someone's taken time to consider the ecological impacts of construction, how we build nature into our developments. It's a kind of like a built equivalent of retrofitting a bird box onto the side of a building or into a garden. But if we're taking the time to look at that, let's take the time to look at how we can build nature into all our facets of our society. How we can make sure that we're building nature-rich solutions into things, how we're looking at catchment area solutions rather than concrete solutions to flooding, how we're making sure that the materials that we're using in construction of new buildings are genuinely carbon tracked, are genuinely carbon sensitive, and don't require refits. Because there is a real urgency to addressing the climate crisis, but we are failing to do so as a country and as a city. Many of the new buildings that we're putting up in Plymouth at this very moment, many of those new homes, they're not up to zero carbon standards. They're not passive house standards. They will need retrofitting in only a few years' time. We all need to take out 35 million gas boilers in the future and replace them with alternatives. We'll need to have a street by street effort to insulate our homes reducing bills, but also reducing carbon emissions, creating jobs in the process. All of those require grand scale introductions, grand scale vision and interventions along the way. But in doing so, we need to make sure we're building nature and the protection of nature in. So when you hear people talk about COP26 this year, recognize it's an important global conference, but it's not the only one. There's two others I want to briefly mention. One of those is COP15. Now, if you know about COP26, you get a brownie point in terms of that, because not everyone still does. If you know about COP15, you get a gold star, because hardly anyone knows about COP15. COP15 is the conference on biodiversity. It's being hosted by China. Incredibly important conference. It's the first time China has ever hosted a global United Nations conference of the parties at this scale. They need it to be a success. And after the coronavirus, which most likely is a zoonotic disease, that's a disease that's transferred from the animal kingdom to humans because of our interventions into different habitats, clashing together different species that wouldn't normally mix. It's even more important that we recognize that protecting biodiversity isn't just about saving picture postcard species, isn't just about protecting those vulnerable animals, birds and insects that are on the verge of extinction. It's about protecting our way of life at the same time. Now, I worry that there's a focus on carbon, but not one on those habitats. But if you think about what habitats are trying to be protected in that effort, it's not only the big lungs of the world, the forests, the jungles, the Amazon that's being destroyed by the Brazilian government at a fast pace. It's the wetlands, it's the meadows. In the UK, it's our hedgerows, it's our salt marshes, it's our moorlands, it's our peatlands, it's our rare coastal communities, coastal habitats at the same time. And that's where I think Plymouth has an incredible story to say. Now, I'm a Plymouth MP, so I would say this, wouldn't I? But we have an incredible story to tell about what we are doing here in this city, in the Southwest, to address the climate crisis. That's why when the eyes of the world will be on us for a few days in the summer, when the G7 world leaders come to Cornwall, we need to not only be having focus on what happens in that conference centre, but using that platform to tell the story about how the Southwest is innovating on geothermal power, how we're innovating on floating offshore wind turbines, how we're innovating in terms of seagrass. I'm so wonderful that Loveday is going to take us through this in a bit, because there's such a focus on solving the ecological crisis that says, oh, just plant some more trees. Well, we do need to plant trees. We need to plant billions of trees as a country. But the government is already missing their tree planting target by 73% on pretty average and pedestrian measures. So we do need to have that ramping up. But carbon sequestration can't just be about tree planting. And that's why I think the opportunities that the Southwest has around promoting seagrass and the commercial exploitation of seagrass, people using their offset to buy seagrass offset in the UK, and the Southwest, the NMA, the university being at the forefront of that, is something we should really, really tell our story loudly and proudly about. But if you're here, you probably also know Plymouth. You know that we hide our light under a bushel, and we frequently then hide the bushel. That's why I want to kind of like tell you that the people you're about to hear from today are doing brilliant, innovative work. We need to promote that innovative work. We need to make it accessible for people to feel that they can be part of it. Not everyone's going to get the chance to plant seagrass reefs. Not everyone's going to get the chance to build passive house standard, world-leading architecture. But everyone's got the chance to value their local park. Everyone's got the chance to value a community orchard, to be part of community projects that help build nature into their community, even if they don't have the ability to put a swift brick in the side of a new build. And that's where I think the opportunity really is for us, because I worry that we're not, as a country, doing the heavy lifting we need to decarbonise our economy, to hit the Committee on Climate Change's carbon budgets, to do so that protects the rare and fragile species that are at risk at the moment. Because once they're gone for good. We've only got less than 10 years left to prevent irreversible climate chaos. That means we're going to have to go faster and harder than we're doing at the moment. And just as you probably found yourself in the first lockdown saying, this nature is really important, the access to nature and green space is really important, I want you to think, as the restrictions start to ease, as we see a route out of the horrors of the pandemic, so what? What are we going to do with that learning? What are we going to do in our individual worlds, in our professional lives, in the way that we vote and the way that we communicate with leaders and people in public life to get people to put building back better in a genuine way, not just the sound bites, at the forefront of what happens? There can be no return to business as usual. So let's make the case that the world in which we emerge from this virus has to be one where we value nature more, that we protect it more, where we make sure that it's accessible to everyone, and there the National Trust's campaign of everyone living within 10 to 15 minutes walk of accessible green space has to be part of that tapestry of measures that we put in place. Plymouth's lucky on that, but not everywhere is. We need to make sure that we are genuinely building back better and that we're not accepting or standing for any greenwash. The final point I want to mention to you is, despite the hurry to issue green sound bites, we need to be mindful of steps backwards as well as steps forwards. One of those happened only a couple of weeks ago when the government lifted the ban on bee-killing pesticides. Now, bees are amazing and everyone bloody loves bees. You probably do as well. It might be politically convenient to lift a ban on bee-killing pesticides to support sugar beet farmers in the east of England that are having a real problem with their crops at the moment. And I have a lot of sympathy for those farmers. But we'll need to give the government, be it a red one, a blue one, or a mix, the courage to know that they need to take tough decisions, and that when they do, the public will stand behind them. Lifting the ban on bee-killing pesticides took us back, not only on that cause, but on the idea that those commitments that can be given can be reversed. We mustn't let that be the case. We need to encourage the government that we have today and any government in the future to be bolder and faster in their commitment to the climate and to nature at the same time. And the best way of doing that is by taking every single person in our community along with that journey. And that's where I think the story that Plymouth has to say, that the opportunities that we have to promote, the examples that we can show people that they can see with their very eyes is really quite impressive. So that's my final point I want to say. Thank you for inviting me to come along today, and enjoy the rest of the seminar.
Thank you so much, Luke. I totally agree with you. This is now the opportunity to make a difference. I totally agree with that Plymouth has an amazing story to tell as well. And we don't often make shouts about all the great things that we're doing, especially looking at some of the people that have been speaking on our past webinars. There's just some amazing work that's going on. So thanks so much for taking time at your busy schedule for us today. I'm sure you have lots of questions for Luke and the rest of our panelists coming up, so please get your questions in by using the Q&A button, or please wait to the end. I'll pass you on now to Loveday Trinick, live from the National Marine Aquarium. Over to you, Loveday.
Fantastic. Thank you, Miles, and amazing talk from Luke there. Thank you for saying such lovely things about the seagrass, which is going to be the focus of my talk within this webinar. So as mentioned there, I am coming from the National Marine Aquarium, so you can see some fish behind me here. I hope that's nice and soothing for everyone. A little bit of mindfulness in the afternoon. Enjoy that. I am actually going to cover it up with a presentation though, so apologies. Hopefully, I'm not sure if this will cover your entire screen or not, but hopefully you will all be able to see this presentation pop up here. Hopefully that's going to come up full screen. Here we go. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about seagrass, a bit about blue carbon. So I'll come on to what that is if anyone's not too sure in a minute, and restoring habitat. So the work being done by the Life Recreation ReMEDIES project, of which the Ocean Conservation Trust is a partner, to work to bring back seagrass beds to their former glory within Plymouth Sound. So that's sort of what I'm going to be going through. And I thought I'd actually start because seagrass is it's just an incredible habitat. It's just such an amazing resource, not just for humans, but actually for the animals that live there. It's an amazing ecosystem, but it's very hidden out of sight. We were talking earlier, Luke was talking about planting trees and sort of restoring terrestrial habitats we can all see, our local parks, our woodlands, our gardens. We can see these places, but seagrass is very hidden. It's out of sight. So for anyone who hasn't been lucky enough to actually visit one, here's a little video. So you can see it there. This is, I believe this is a seagrass bed that is just off of Drake's Island. So between Drake's Island and the main shore of Plymouth. As you can see, it's long and luscious. The amazing thing about seagrass is it's actually the only flowering plant to be found within the oceans. So it is a plant, unlike our seaweeds that we find when we go to the beach. It does have a root structure, so it actually roots into the seabed, rather than having a gripping sort of hold fast, we call it, for the seaweeds. It does have a rooting structure. It produces seeds, it flowers, and it's beautiful. As you can see, it's also home to some wonderful creatures there. We've got a couple of spider crabs having a piggyback there. There was a little bib having a little sneaky swim through, and you can even see some anemones clinging to the seagrass blades themselves. So an amazing habitat, amazing ecosystem, home to many beautiful animals, including the enigmatic seahorse. You'll find dolphins coming in, all sorts of just really cool creatures that call it home. It's not just the creatures that get something from this environment, we do as well. I just wanted to go through just a few of the benefits of seagrass to us as people, our connection to it. We have a connection to this environment. It might be out of sight, we might not see it every day, but we do have a connection to it, and that connection goes both ways. And I'd like to talk first about what we actually get from the seagrass. There's just a few of them on this screen here. You can see that it actually acts as a nursery ground for juvenile fish species. So it says there are about at least 9 commercially important species of fish shelter when they're babies, when they're juveniles. They spend their early years hanging out in the seagrass beds. It's sheltered, it's safe. There's plenty of invertebrate life, plenty of little gribblies for them to snack on to get big and strong before they head off out into offshore fisheries where they can be caught and delivered to our plates. So we actually have the seagrass beds to thank for our fish and chips. So there's one reason to love it. So if you like pollock, plaice, herring, any of those sorts of species, that's where they hang out when they're young, when they're babies. Also, another added benefit of having seagrass in our coastal areas is that it takes a lot of the wave energy out of those big sea storms that sea storms, is that a word? Big storms at sea. So when those waves are coming crashing in the big high winds we get here in the southwest and around the world as well, the seagrass acts as a natural coastal defence. So it takes that energy out of the waves, prevents it from damaging our shorelines. We also have it as a waste reduction sort of facility as well. So it takes nitrogen out and fixes it and makes it available for other animals to use, but also it copes with some of that extra runoff that comes off the land from agriculture. So things like fertilizers that wash into the water, anything like that, it helps to sort of combat that a little as well. But it's really that final point on there that I haven't mentioned yet. We have been talking a lot about carbon today and about the climate situation that we're all facing as a population, and really that's going to be the focus I'd like to move on to. So we talked about blue carbon earlier. Blue carbon is the word we give, the phrase we give to carbon that's locked away in marine and coastal ecosystems. So around the world, we've got lots of really cool ones. Mangroves, they're a great blue carbon ecosystem. Got tidal marshes and seagrasses. They store carbon not only in the plant material itself, but also in the sediment. So when these plants are photosynthesizing, they're taking carbon out of the environment, and they're locking it away. They're keeping it in the body of the plant itself and in the sediment. You can see the cover of these ecosystems as a total globally is about 49 million hectares, so it's quite a large area. But of that share, seagrasses only cover about 0.2% of the seabed. So globally, 0.2% of the seabed has seagrass growing within it. But if you can see there, it actually sequesters around 10% of the carbon stored in ocean systems every year. So 10% of the carbon that's stored within ocean sediments, seagrass is actually responsible for that. There's only 0.2% of the seabed covered in it. It's actually thought that blue carbon, the carbon sequestration within marine environments is more efficient than terrestrial ones. So we were talking earlier, Luke was saying about planting trees being one way of removing carbon from the environment. These ones could be a better one. These could be actually more efficient, more capable, and therefore really worthy of our consideration in protecting and planting, which we'll come on to. So coming back to seagrass, mangroves are really cool, but it's all about the seagrass. We do have seagrass here in Plymouth, but also globally. So we were talking earlier about the global sort of seagrass blue carbon. But we're just going to focus in on Plymouth a little bit here. Before I do, we're saying that it locks it away in the sediment. That's really a vital point here, because it's locking it away in the sediment and not just in the plant itself. It can remain there for centuries. So we could have carbon stores hundreds, if not thousands of years old, locked away in the sediment underneath these seagrass beds. So not only is it continuing to take out the carbon, by protecting these places, we're also making sure that carbon isn't released back into the environment to cause more harm. So we said this is a two-way street. So we were talking earlier about what we get from seagrass and saying how we have that connectivity with marine ecosystems. That connection does go both ways. So we've got a system here where it's very close to our shorelines. Seagrass tends to grow in 10 meters or less of water. So when you stand on the shore, if you're lucky enough to visit Plymouth Hoe and look out to sea, there is seagrass within that view. So if you look in that water just between the shore and Drake's Island, you've got that seabed that we saw, that seagrass bed that we saw in the video. Over to the left, we've got Jenny Cliff. There's another seabed there, seagrass bed there. So it's really close to where we live, which means that we can have an impact on it quite easily. And there's just a couple of little impacts here that I've put. We've got things like damage from moorings, from traditional swing moorings. You'll often get a very large concrete block or a car tyre, or sometimes an old engine, something heavy on the seabed with a chain that goes up to a mooring buoy on the surface. And those chains can drag on the seabed and cause quite a lot of damage, along with anchoring as well. You also have the physical damage from fishing pressures as well, so trawling and those sorts of things as well. Runoff from the land and climate change can both cause impacts on seagrass as well. So while we're talking about what seagrass can do for us, we also have to think about how we can all have an impact on protecting these amazing places. When we're talking about blue carbon, we're talking about the ability of these beds to sequester carbon. We are thinking about established beds, so beds that have been there for a long time. Those ones are the ones that are most efficient at locking away the carbon, and as we've already said, they have this embedded carbon already locked away in their sediments. What we're going to come on to next is the work being done by the Life Recreation ReMEDIES project, of which that's what I work for. And the goal of this project is to improve the condition of seagrass seabed habitat. We're focusing on seagrass here because we're talking about carbon sequestration, but actually it's not just seagrass within this project. We're also talking about merle beds as well. So seabed habitats as a whole. We want to improve the condition of those within 5 special areas of conservation. So those areas are the Scilly and the Fallon Helford down in Cornwall. We also got Plymouth Sound. we have the Solent and Essex estuaries as well. So these amazing places, 5 really special places where we get seagrass growing, that's the focus of this project. We are working with people, and I think it's really important sort of message from today is what people can do to sort of help here. And sometimes, as Luke was saying earlier, the climate change can feel like this enormous problem. It can feel something that we can't do something about, but we can all do something to protect our local natural spaces. And one thing we're focusing on within this project is working with recreational boaters to help them know where seagrass beds are and know how to protect them. So instead of using traditional moorings, we're putting in eco moorings or advanced mooring systems which lift the chain off the seabed or remove the chain altogether and replace it with a different material. So we're working with those boaters to best help them to protect the environment that they love. And actually, if you work with these people, if you work with boaters, they want to protect the environment. They really want to help, and they just need that information to do so. So that's the point of this project and what we're doing. So it's partly about protecting the environment, but it's also about restoring some of the damage that's already been done. So something like 92% of UK seagrass beds have been lost in the last century. So we are losing these places due to all those issues that we mentioned earlier. So here's a map just to show you some of the seagrass beds that we've got around Plymouth. You've got 2 just down below Wembury there. We've got Tomb Rock and Sellers Cove. We've got the beautiful one just off of Drake's Island, which I showed you a video of earlier. And over in Cornwall, we've got a beautiful bed just off of Cawsand Bay, very popular beach, lovely in the summer. Hopefully we can get back there soon. And we've got Jenny Cliff as well. So all of these amazing seagrass beds are within the Plymouth Sound and Estuaries special area conservation. They're all protected. They're all a qualifying feature of that SAC because they are so important. They're just so important for so many reasons that we mentioned earlier. Provide us with seafood, climate change, all the amazing benefits of having these incredible places. And look how close they are to where we live. They're right off the shore of Plymouth. They're within our view from the shore. And if we're lucky enough to get out on a boat, they are underneath the boat. They're just right there. Really quite incredible. So we are looking to restore some of those beds as well, as protect the ones that are still there. And to restore the beds, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process we go through now. So we're going to tell you a little bit about how we actually go about restoring a habitat. It's not as simple as going and planting grass in your garden or even planting a tree. And it's quite tricky. So I'm going to go through the process that we go through. And to understand that, it's nice to know a little bit about the life cycle of the organism we're talking about, this seagrass. So you have your adult plants growing their rooting structure, and the lovely sort of swaying green plants we saw earlier, flowing in the currents. Every summer, those plants start to produce seeding shoots. So they get an extra little shoot come off. It looks a little bit different, a little bit brighter. In there you have lots and lots of little seeds. These seeds eventually, towards the end of the summer, start to drop out of the plant, fall to the seabed, where hopefully they land in the nice patch of sand with suitable conditions, and they grow into a little sapling. This is actually quite rare. So these seeds, not many of them germinate. Not many of them actually survive. Lots of them get eaten. They're a lovely source of food for all those little creatures that are living there, enjoying them. And actually, most of the seagrass bed reproduces by using its rhizome there. So part of the rooting structure is known as a rhizome. It spreads out horizontally. It goes underneath the seabed, and it shoots up another little sprout, another little sapling. And that's how you get new seagrass growth most of the time. So these seeds, they are really, really important for us because we go and collect them. So in those summer months, when all the beds are shooting up their little seeding shoots, We go out with a commercial dive team and we hand pick them. So we don't take every seed, whilst they're not vital to the bed's survival. We still don't take every seed. So we have take one, miss three sort of attitude to it. So for every 4 seeding shooting plants, we'll take the seeding shoots from 1. And we go along like that, and we collect hundreds of thousands of these little seeds, and we take them back to our lab. You can see in the pictures here, the hand on the right is holding a seeding chute containing lots of little seeds there. You've got in the middle, you've got Emma Nolan, our wonderful seagrass cultivation officer, looking really chuffed with one of the boxes from a day's diving. She's ready to take those back to the lab. And that's the next step. So back here at the National Marine Aquarium, we have a purpose-built seagrass growing lab. And the first job is actually to get the seeds out of the seagrass. So hopefully this will play here. You can see some swirling mucky seagrass. So in that tank there, that's where we put all of the matter we've collected on the dives, and we allow the seeds to naturally rot out of the seagrass, the seeding shoots. We allowed it to naturally fall out as it would in the wild. We try to simulate conditions in those tanks, nice sort of clean water. We keep it aerated and keep it as natural as we can. Once that happens, we end up with lots of little seeds. So these are our little seeds of hope, seeds of the future. You can coin your phrase, anything you like. They're just very tiny little seeds, as you can imagine. And we look after them. We store them in a nice cool condition to prevent them germinating too early. And we store them very carefully. We look after them really well. When we're ready to plant, we take these little seeds and we put them into little Hessian bags. Now, these Hessian bags have got a mixture of sand and other sort of loam and other sort of ingredients in these little bags. We sprinkle in about 30 seeds per bag, and some of them go into our lab. And in there, we grow them to little seedlings. We actually allow them to germinate and to grow into little plants. These will then be planted out into the ocean. So we'll take these bags out, we'll take them into the ocean, and we will plant them on the seabed. And hopefully those little plants will continue to grow, become adult plants, bed themselves into the seabed, and the whole process will continue beautifully. Some of them we will be throwing into the sea as bags of seed, so seed bombs, if you like. So some of these bags will be taken directly to the ocean as soon as they're packed and put into the sea. The goal of this is to restore a site within Plymouth just off of Jenny Cliff. And over the course of the project, we are aiming to restore about 8 hectares of seagrass beds. So we're aiming to grow about 8 hectares of seagrass over the course of this project. Now, as I was saying earlier, restoring seagrass is one part of the story. It is something we can do, and it's something that lots of people are trying to do, and lots very successfully. It is one part of the story, though. What we need to be doing is also protecting these seagrass beds. And we've been mentioning today how everyone can play their part, everyone can have a role in this. We've mentioned recreational boaters. Not everyone has a boat. I don't have a boat. But we can all actually play our role in protecting these places by just having a connection to our oceans, understanding how we fit in, and that's not protecting it by not going there. It's actually protecting it by going there, going to your local beach when we're allowed, having a walk along the cliff on our wonderful coast path, just enjoying nature, getting out and actually appreciating it, because the more we appreciate it, the more we have a connection to it, the more we want to protect it. And that's what we're really all about. So yeah, we can restore nature, and that's what we should be doing, but we can also protect what's there and look after our wonderful natural places that we have on our shores, on our coastlines, and our parks, and our fields, and our woodlands, and everywhere else in between. So that's I'm going to bring myself to an end there. So thank you very much for listening to me talk about the Life Recreation ReMEDIES project and its work in seagrass restoration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Loveday. We're really lucky to have so many sea plants areas around our city. Really lucky. And I love it even more now, especially if it's good for fish and chips. So that's great. So next up we have Paul, Dr. Paul Lunt and Dr. Thomas Murphy. They're from the Plymouth University, and they'll be talking about how biodiversity can be physically introduced into building design. So Paul, over to you first.
So welcome everyone, and I can get my slide up. Great, excellent. Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you to ReMEDIES Southwest for inviting me to present. My name's Dr. Paul Lunt, and I'm director of the Low Carbon Devon project at the University of Plymouth, and I'm going to be talking about the benefits of biophilic design. So thank you, Loveday, for those excellent, amazing pictures of the seagrass beds. I'm going to be coming out of the waterbow and talking to you about our urban environments in particular. And I wanted to just basically echo some of the points that Luke mentioned. We have these joint challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, and this is directly relevant to the urban environment. In terms of climate change, building and construction are responsible for an estimated 39% of the carbon emissions in the world. This includes operational emissions from energy use and heat to cool and light buildings, and accounting for some 28%, and the remaining 11% comes from embedded carbon. So that's the carbon that's actually embodied in the actual building material itself. And in terms of biodiversity loss, the latest reports from the UN estimate globally that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. And infrastructure and urban development is one of the leading concerns for biodiversity loss in the UK. So this presents us with a challenge going forward. And that challenge is required solutions. Now, at present, where, how, and what we build is mostly not fit for a net zero carbon future. So we got these ambitious targets at the university for being net zero by 2025, at the Plymouth by Plymouth City Council by 2030, and the UK by 2050. So ambitious, great to have those, but the new buildings should be designed and constructed to net zero energy use standards. And in particular, this means that developers, government, planning authorities, architects, designers, and engineers need to work towards this common cause. Now, I appreciate preaching to the converted here, but in order to meet the kind of passive house design, we've got a lot to do. A net zero carbon building needs to have low embodied carbon, a carefully planned orientation, maximize use of natural light, and be well insulated, air sealed, but also allow ventilation, and generate, store, and ideally export renewable electricity to the grid. So these are our big challenges, and the buildings that we're building don't look like that at the moment. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a particular aspect of building design, which we're working on here at the university, and that's biophilia in architecture. So some of you, I appreciate, who are architects will have a good understanding of this from your courses, but biophilic design is an approach to architecture that seeks to connect building occupants more closely with nature. So a biophilic design building incorporates things like natural lighting, ventilation, natural landscape features, and plants, more importantly. And I'm going to be talking about plants today. So I'm going to be talking about the benefits that incorporating plants into building design can have. I think we'd all kind of agree, just looking at that image on the slide there, that that living walls, living roofs, how aesthetically pleasing. They certainly enhance the property value of a building. But they're also important for carbon sequestration. So the latest research shows that a square metre of living wall can sequester between 100 grams and a kilogram of carbon each year. So a building the size of that one there, 20+ story building, would be sequestering maybe up to a ton of CO2 equivalent per year. And that is that's when the arisings, the cuttings are taken and composted, so we're not losing all of that that carbon. So even though this may well not seem that much compared to the kind of energy demanding urban environments, it's still, you know, a significant contribution, particularly when you think of London, for instance, where there is now over 1.5 million meters squared of living wall and green roof. So I'm going to have a talk about the benefits of incorporating plantings into building design. I'm going to cover these 6 points: air quality, well-being, noise, water, biodiversity, and finish off with talking about the heat island effects and insulation benefits of having living walls and roofs. I'm then going to pass on to Thomas Murphy, Dr. Tom Murphy, who will be talking about some of the research work that we're doing at the university in relation to insulation benefits. So first of all, air quality has been a major issue in our cities, and will continue to be when the cars return, at least for the foreseeable future, until we have a decent percentage of electric vehicles on the road. Tall buildings in particular create street canyons which can trap pollutants at street level, and living walls can increase the deposition rate by as much as 40% for nitrogen dioxide and 60% for some of the smaller particulate matter, which are responsible for health concerns within our urban environments. And indoor plantings in particular have a significant effect on CO2 concentrations in the air. So in a sealed building, poorly ventilated room, for instance, you can get doubling of CO2 concentrations, and that can cause drowsiness and loss of attention. Whereas, of course, if you've got plants in that room, then they are, if they're actively photosynthesizing, they'll be fixing that CO2 and reducing those CO2 concentrations, as well as absorbing things like volatile organic carbons. So they give us all of these various ecosystem services that are really, really important to us. Mental and physical well-being is certainly very much on the agenda at the moment, with lockdown and people being almost trapped in their houses, particularly if they're in high rises, not having exposure to nature. This has been, the importance of plants to people has been extensively studied in the literature, and the health benefits for plants in the built environment has been well studied. In particular, improved pain tolerance, cognitive functioning, reduced stress, and improved mood amongst those folks that are within buildings with plantings, living walls, and also office-based plantings. So all of which contribute to improved health and well-being. In terms of noise reduction, so living wall structures can reduce noise levels in buildings, and plants are regularly used to reduce noise on motorways within urban environments. And living walls can also reduce noise level by reflecting, as well as absorbing acoustic energy. So in the studies that have been carried out in office environments, A quiet workspace was rated as the second most important element of an office environment after artificial light. Third was a view, and fourth was plants. So this is something that's really close to my heart, improving urban biodiversity. And we've already heard from Loveday about marine biodiversity, but within our urban environments, biodiversity is even more important to us, particularly things like bird song. And Luke mentioned birds as well, which are bees as well, which are very charismatic species. So in terms of these kind of living walls, like the one in the image here, these vertical structures can provide roosting and nesting sites for crevice-dwelling urban bat and bird species in particular, and particularly if you're incorporating the swift bricks into these buildings, then the building all of a sudden has a foraging and food source for those birds, so it becomes much more valuable to them. So living walls and roofs can provide areas for wildlife in urban areas where ground level space for vegetation is limited. Pollen, nectar, rich plantings in particular can attract bees and insects, and provide vegetation, and organic rich soils can provide a habitat for invertebrate larvae in particular, which are really important within the actual food chain, the base of the food chain. And also these roofs and living walls can support biodiversity in cities at a landscape scale, so they can act as stepping stones for species to move within the urban environment, maintaining their population. So you've got corridors, stepping stones, linking hopefully with the wider countryside. Rainfall, in particular, rainfall intensity is a critical thing for us to think about with climate change. So in the future, we're likely to be getting an increase in the amount and intensity of rainfall. And in our urban environments, of course, where we've got sealed ground, the opportunities for that water to get to ground are limited. And living walls, green roofs and rain gardens can absorb that rainwater and help to slow down the runoff, making urban areas less prone to flash flooding. So in the case of intense storm events, you can be looking at green roofs reducing storm flows by up to 80%. They're really important for us going forward, as well as cleaning that water as well. So all of those particulates and pollutants in our urban environment can be filtered out as well within the vegetation. But coming on to climate change now. So urban environments are increasingly seeing the effects of heat stress, even in the UK. So under the present emissions trajectory that we're on at the moment, we'll reach a 2-degree warmer world by 2050. We've already had 1 degree of warming so far. And this it has a massive impact on people's health and comfort within urban areas. So the concrete surfaces, the roofs and the pavements of our urban areas, where they're dry and the sun's shining on them, can heat up to several tens of degrees above the air temperature. So typically when you come into an urban environment, particularly when you've got high pressure over and the air is still, you'll see your thermometer in your car or whatever you're driving, or go up by 1 to 3 degrees as you enter into the highly concentrated buildings in the centre. So when it comes to vegetation, of course, the evapotranspiration off vegetation, trees and grass surfaces can lower that temperature. So living walls and roofs can act like that, causing a reduction in that heat island effect, which we see in our urban environments. And you might think at Plymouth, we don't really need to be too concerned about this. But in the UK, so if we take London, for instance, so London will experience the equivalent summer temperatures that Barcelona previously received. So that's the equivalent basically of London going 1,000 kilometers down to the south, and places like Madrid will be similar to Marrakesh, and Reykjavik like Edinburgh. This is all going to be within our lifetimes, so it's a serious consideration. And looking forward at the energy costs of the cooling systems in our hotter cities, so air conditioning units in particular, under this 2-degree hotter world, we could be looking at increased electricity use, which is equivalent to the present use of the US, Japan, and also Europe combined. So that's not, we need to have different strategies going forward, and living walls and green roofs have a potential part to play in this. Closer to home then, we've got our Sustainable Earth Institute. So this is an image taken using an infrared camera of the rear of our sustainability hub in January. So it's taken when the weather conditions were very cold, a little bit like they are today. What you can see there are the redder colours of where the heat is being conducted through the walls to the outside. And hopefully what you can notice in the middle there is a rectangle, if you can see my cursor on the screen, a rectangle there of yellow showing the cooler surfaces of the wall there. And if you were to go inside the Sustainability Hub, you'll see that we've got a 2-story living wall on the inside of that building, which is preventing heat loss from to the exterior. So it just shows you there the impacts of this in the cold. Of course, the opposite is also true on days when it's warm as well, where we get a cooling effect from having plants either on the inside or outside of the actual building itself. But Tom will pick up on that a little bit more in his presentation. But I just wanted to finish off with a few successes from Plymouth and the first living wall. So the Genesis building was named Best Building in Plymouth, Abercrombie Awards in 2017. This was built by Midas Construction for Millfields Trust and designed by Form Design. And if any of you know that building on Union Street, there's a picture of it there on the slide. It is beautiful. You can see there, this is taken in the summer with there's a high planting of Mediterranean plants with good nectar and pollen sources on there. And there's also the European dark beehives on the roof of this building. Now, Plymouth in particular, with its mild climate, its maritime climate, it's not too hot in the summer months, it's not too cold in the winter, apart from just now, of course, and that's really good for plants that are exposed on these kind of vertical surfaces. And of course, we tend to have a relatively frequent rainfall as well. So Plymouth is highly suited for growing plants on these vertical surfaces. So in the future, I'm hoping that we'll see more plantings like this. And certainly our work, or part of our work on the low carbon Devon project, is about engaging businesses in reducing their carbon usage. In particular, this is an invitation for you, whether you're a student or an organisation, to get involved with us in the low carbon Devon project. So if you're an organisation who'd like to share industrial knowledge, networking, then you may be able to contribute to one of our low carbon events to inspire positive change. Or you might have existing low carbon products or services that you're trying to develop and like to work with one of our 4 industrial research fellows, of which Tom is one of those, working on the green wall sector. But we've also got an industrial research fellow working on powered electronics, creative industry, and energy efficiency in buildings. So if that's something you're interested in, and in particular, there is funding available to work with these academics to produce new product services and products. So if you have any ideas, but not the time, we could also potentially link you up with one of our skilled graduate students for an internship over a period of 1 to 3 months. So there's contact details down there at the bottom of the slide. Please get in touch and let us know how we can help you. I'm going to finish now and hand over to Tom to talk about his exciting work that he's doing on the Sustainability Hub.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll just share my screen. Okay, so first of all, it's probably best to introduce myself. So I'd first of all like to say it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all today. So I just want to thank Southwest ReMEDIES for the opportunity. It's really great to see so many people interested in carbon, the biodiversity. I think it's the moment for it. So it's really exciting. So I'm going to first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name's, as Paul sort of briefly introduced me, my name's Thomas Murphy. I'm a Greenwall's Industrial Research Fellow with the Low Carbon Devon Project. So my role is really, it's two-track approach really. So first of all, to actually do some research looking at optimizing green walls within Devon and more widely. So particularly looking at plant choice, growth medium, but then also to work with Devon-based SMEs who are really interested in finding out more about green walls. I've got some ideas about green walls that they could work with me on, or just really potential interested in opportunities within the green wall sector. So yeah, as Paul has briefly said, we're really lucky to have two fantastic green walls in Plymouth. So, on the left here, you can see this is the University of Plymouth. This is a living wall which was installed in 2019. So this is Kirkby Lodge. So it's right in the middle of the campus. And it's a really, fantastic example of a bit of greenery amidst the urban jungle, which is too often many of our towns and cities. And then on the right, again, is the Millfield Trust, the Genesis building, which is another great example of green infrastructure and how we can start to do make a difference really in urban settings. So I'm going to give you a bit more detail about the green wall system at Plymouth. Then I'm going to talk to you about some of the research that I'm going to be conducting. And then I'm going to do a shameless plug about opportunities and events we potentially have coming up, which you can potentially be involved in. And I look forward to discussion. So living wall systems that we have installed at Kirkby Lodge was installed on the west and south facing masonry walls in November 2019. And it's all part of a retrofit of the building, which was all done through the European Union's Regional Development Fund. So we've seen if you get a chance, please go and see it. You can't unfortunately go inside it at the moment, but you could. If you go to campus, it's a fantastic building to look at. So it uses a external living wall system. So this is a modular system. So it's not climbers going up the outside of the building. You've got a sort of dedicated phytotextile living wall system that I'm sure the architects amongst you would have seen around. And this was installed by Scottscape Limited, so they're now responsible for the maintenance. And it's a soil-based system, so it uses fabric phytotextile sheets with pockets, which has room for soil and planting. And this is fixed to the wall via timber frame. So this timber frame goes up on the outside of the building. And then the plants are supplied with water and nutrients via a drip feed irrigation system. So in the top picture, you can just about see it over near the doorway here. And on the picture below, that this piping system basically supplies the water and the nutrients to the front of the module. So at the back, you've got a waterproof backing panel, and you've got an air cavity there. And inside Kirkby Lodge, we've also had, as Paul mentioned, we've got this internal living wall. So this is west-facing living wall. And again, it's a soil-based system, but it uses a slightly different modular design. And again, the plants are fed and watered by a drip feed irrigation system. And in this system, we've got some supplementary lighting, as green walls typically need a minimum lightness requirement. So in indoor settings, as I'm sure you're aware, that it can be quite a challenge for plants. So it's getting this right is really important. So I suppose, we're talking about all the benefits of green walls, but it's also important to consider some of the potential drawbacks and the things to consider that we need to get right. And, I think it was really well noted by Luke earlier that actually it's often the financial burdens that can be the most costly for us in terms of taking action. So with green walls, there's quite a big maintenance commitment required. So this can be expensive, you know, depending on who you go to. You know, it can be quite a considerable commitment. So water and nutrient inputs as well. So that's a considerable potential environmental burden. So that uses energy. So pumping that water to the green wall system. We've got the nutrient inputs. And then so again, you've got an ongoing financial cost. And you've also got the potential replacement cost. So living wall systems may require ongoing plant replacements if it's not done correctly. So again, it's about getting it right. And this is where hopefully we can get our research to make sure we can knock down those barriers. And then also pests and humidity. So this can be a problem, particularly for interior green walls without careful design and maintenance. So talking about some of the drawbacks green wall, I'm now going to talk about some of the really cool research which we're doing at the university, which is showing the real potential benefits. So this was some research which is, so I've started on the project about a few months ago, and this is some initial work which was done before my time, which is immediately after the green wall was installed, which looked at comparing your heat flux, so your thermal transmission, which is often, you know, calculated with a U value. So so we looked at comparing that U value in across the living wall and within the adjacent wall, which has the same construction. So it's a masonry wall with an unfilled cavity. And so we looked at comparing those values, and a U value was calculated. So there's some really quite great results, and these are courtesy of Dr. Matt Fox, who's done this early bit of research, and he finds that initially we find that without the living wall, the U value is 1.12 watts per square meter Kelvin. But simply by having that living wall on the outside, we see a big reduction in the U value down to 0.77 watts per square meter Kelvin. So essentially we see a 31% improvement over the original state wall. So, you know, and just to stick that into context, that equates roughly equal to the same savings you would see with cavity fill insulation. So when we start to talk about options for our cities, then green walls start to become quite an attractive option. So, you know, you're getting the same energy saving potential benefits, you know, the carbon saving on space heating, but then you're also getting those biodiversity, there's multiple benefits that Paul mentioned. So plants alter their environment naturally by lots of different methods. So you've got, first of all, got the shading effect. So this is can be particularly powerful, you know, in warm climates. So, you know, with our climate getting warmer, you know, Paul's talking about London becoming Barcelona in a few years, and that solar radiation, that shading effect can be really considerable, can make a big difference to surface temperature. So that also benefits, you know, the photosynthesis for the plants, that draws in carbon. Then you've got the evapotranspiration. So I always think of evapotranspiration, it's the equivalent to sweating as we do as humans. So when we sweat, you know, it cools our skin, and the plants, that's the similar process what transpiration does. So it cools its immediate environment. And again, that can be responsible for quite big reductions in temperature, which could make a real difference to making our cities livable. Then we've got the wind barrier effect. So I'm sure you all were comfortable with the Plymouth wind that rain and wind that we get. And, you know, plants can make a big difference to modifying the way wind moves around buildings. And then you've got the insulation effect. So that's both above and below ground. So above, you've got air that gets trapped in plant tissues and under the canopy. Then also down in the ground, you've got the macropores within the soil. These are sort of little air pockets that allow that insulation to happen. And that, you know, that can serve both as a cooling in the summer and then keeping in the warmth in the winter when we need it. And again, all of that is directly drawing in carbon for the roots and the plants. So why does plant choice matter? So I think this is perhaps where my research is heading, is looking at optimizing that. And plants, depending on what they are going to have really different properties in terms of the ability to alter their thermal environment. So there's a picture here of this Fatsia japonica. So this is a very large leaf species. It's got big surface area. It's going to have very different thermal qualities to something like a Carex, which has these narrow, thin strip leaves. Very different thermal properties. And then we've got also this up at the top. We've got the silver-leafed pubescent leaves plants here, and we know that silver and pubescent leaves, so leaves of hair, that they're really good at cooling. So they're very good at reducing, cooling the immediate environment. So, you know, there's lots of different considerations when it comes to working out which plant types are the best. You know, often it's the mixture of species that's really important. So different plants are going to have different impacts on biodiversity. So, you know, your winter flowering shrubs are going to be really important for pollinators. You know, so there's lots of different impacts that plant choice is going to make, and it's going to be really important. So whereas air pollution, and then you've got the maintenance requirements, also water runoff. So different plants have different roughness of their canopies, and this can really affect the way the hydrology going across plants. So this can be really important. So as well as that plant choice being really important, it's also the growth mediums are really important for a number of reasons. So the first reason is, you know, simply the impact on plants and their performance. Yeah, there's no good having a green wall that is not, you know, not green. And so if you can see here that the pictures I put up, so you've got the good, so you've got, you know, this is a picture taken not that long ago from the Kirkby living wall, and you know, it's what you want a green wall to be doing. It looks beautiful, it's got flowers for pollinators, and it's probably making a really big difference to the insulation quality of the building. And then this is an example from Bristol, where it's a pretty bad example. So, you know, clearly you've got, it hasn't been done right. You've got probably poor plant choice, poor growth medium choice. And, you know, these are the same systems ultimately, but they've just been calibrated wrong. You know, they've got wrong plant choice, nutrients, etc. So it can make a real difference. And then that all affects sustainability and financial costs of living walls. So, you know, if you get the wrong growth medium choice, plant choice, you know, you have to considerable replacement costs can happen. You know, so we want to, you know, try and be able to reduce those negatives, increase the positives, and also, you know, the water and nutrient requirements that I mentioned earlier. You know, if we can try and reduce that, then growth medium, I think, is the place to do it. And then you've got the physical properties, like Paul mentioned. You've got that noise alleviation. You know, can growth medium, does the type of growth medium affect those qualities, such as, you know, that impact on sound quality, and also water storage. So, and then finally biodiversity. I mean, that's, you know, soils are living things. They're not sort of, people think of, they're often the last thing to get attention, but they're really, really important. So it's more than just a substrate, and as Paul was saying, they're really vital. They provide, you know, really important for invertebrate larvae. You know, they are the base of the food chain. You know, so if you want birds and you want life in your urban areas, you need more insects in, and soils provide that home for them. So some of the research we're going to be doing, that I'm going to be doing, is looking at thermal performance of living walls. So building on the work that we've done previously by Matt Fox, and really looking at testing the impact of different plant types on the thermal performance of living wall systems, looking at growth medium, so how do different types of growth medium affect the performance, and then looking at that cavity behind the wall. So how does that, we're going to test a no vented, so basically it's the cavity is sealed, so it's an unvented air gap. You've got a vented air gap where you've got a cavity, but the air can get in, and no cavity air gap. So literally having the green wall flush, what does the difference of that cavity make? And the rationale for us is that, you know, policymakers are really still reluctant to endorse green walls due to the lack of replicate data sets for the thermal benefits in temperate scenarios. So we need more work to look at that. Also, there's limited information on the most appropriate species to use. And this, like I mentioned before, it's going to have a big impact on the benefits offered and also the maintenance costs. And there's concerns of whether, you know, green walls actually meet sustainability criteria. So again, it's, you know, reducing these negatives and these inputs. So how are we going to do this? So we're going to look at plant type, like I said, soil type, and the air gap. So we've got more than two methods of doing this. So first we've got this, we're setting up these climate change chamber experiments. So we call it a sort of hot box experiment. So looking at controlling the air temperature within an environment and looking how much heat fluxes through this module, and looking at planting of different plant types, different growth medium types, and different events. So we've got this set up at the university that we're in the process of organising, and then also we've got this wonderful building that I'll be able to do some testing on in the near future. So that's pretty much ongoing, that setup. So we're going to be looking at testing the living wall. But again, you know, if you know of any living walls that we could test or be interested in testing, we're hoping to work with some other living walls as well to really to look at optimizing those benefits. So yes, as well as this, looking at that heat flux between walls and the insulation capacity directly, we're also going to be doing some trials looking at some of those plant-soil interactions which I mentioned, which is so important for a number of reasons. So you can see that the picture on the top right is a soil with, it's actually from my garden. You've got some plants, plant root in it, and it makes a massive difference to thermal conductivity compared to the soil on your right. So, you know, if you think of, you know, building material, what we're going to be doing is really looking at that interaction and then testing it in this machine over here called an HHFM, which is basically looks at measuring that thermal performance. So we're going to be testing those interactions. So that's my brief sort of summary of the research side. It's ongoing. And yeah, it should get some interesting results to really help optimise green walls in Devon and in Plymouth. So as well as the research, we've also got some events and workshops which we're going to hope to run over the course of next year. So looking at multiple benefits of green walls for urban planning and design, optimising plant choice and design to maximise these benefits, and then some of the practical requirements and opportunities within the green walls maintenance sector. So it'd be really great to work with people here today. So if you've got any ideas, again, get in touch. And then there's research support. So, you know, if you're interested in testing something new, a new green wall design or an integration into a building, then please, you know, feel free to get in touch. And I'll just leave this here with you. So I want to say thank you for listening, but also to leave you this picture. And this is from Santander in Spain, and this is a green wall system that I think is the biggest in Europe, the internal one. And it just really made me think this is a real ambition that we could be going for. So yeah, I think it's a great picture, and it's you know, who wouldn't want to be in a space like that? You know, it's I think something we should be aiming for. So yeah, I'd like to say thank you for listening, and yeah, look forward to discussing later.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That does look a lovely place to be. And thank you very much, Paul, as well, for your talk. That was fantastic. Some really great stuff there. I just want to say, before we go on to our questions, please, if you want to ask questions to the panel, please raise your hand now, or put them in the chat or the Q&A session button even. I just want to say a big thank you to our lead partners for making this webinar possible. I just want to say a big thank you to Plymouth City Council, REBA, the Low Carbon Devon Project, University of Plymouth, Building Plymouth, the EU, Constructing Excellence, Plymouth Club, Her Majesty's Government, and Striving to Glowing. Thank you so much for getting involved. And also, I just want to remind you guys, before we go into Q&A, please sign up for our next webinar, which is on the 24th of February, same time at 4 o'clock. which will be on retrofitting and reuse. So we've got some really great talks there. So please get your place held at Plymouth, Future Plymouth 2030.co.uk. So I'm going to bring all our speakers back, and we've got some fantastic questions. The first one I spotted actually from Grant actually. He said to each of the panelists, what is the most exciting biodiversity or carbon sequestration, oh, I can never say that word, project that is happening right now in Plymouth that isn't your own? So who would like to, Luke, would you like to go first on that one that you've seen?
I could come in here actually, Miles.
Go ahead, Paul.
So a little bit of bias actually, because I suppose it is mine, but my other research areas in peatlands, and of course we have a real opportunity with Dartmoor on our doorstep for increasing carbon sequestration in our peatlands. I suppose there are the three, aren't there? There are peatlands, and there are woodlands, and then I'll leave it to Loveday to advocate for the marine environment.
Well, I suppose in not my own, I'm gonna go for well, after listening to Loveday's excellent presentation, I'm going to go for seagrasses. I think I'll go for the aquatic. I think that's really exciting. I think we can do a lot. Yeah, and it's Plymouth's Britain's ocean city. We should really embrace that.
Good choice. Good choice. I've got another marine one. I love those living walls. I actually want one in my house. It's just so soothing to be in a place with green around you all the time, and to be able to have that on a building you're in. It's just incredible. So that will be my primary choice. But another one I really like are the bio blocks. Which are, it's a couple of years ago, I think, but Plymouth University and Aquarium, I believe, worked together to build these bio blocks, which they put into the foreshore just outside the aquarium here by the Marine Centre. And these just create patches for animals to live where otherwise it would be a built environment. So slipways and seawalls and otherwise sort of quite flat areas of concrete where animals can't attach themselves. Green living beings can't attach themselves. These bio blocks have got a number of dips and hollows to simulate natural habitats, so rock pools and little burrows. So just sort of introducing biodiversity into a human built environment, right on the shore, right outside the aquarium. You can see them at low tide. Pretty incredible. So yeah, that's a good marine one.
Thanks, guys. Good one from thank you for your question, Grant. Our next question, Eric. Question for you, Paul. Eric says, thanks a lot for the good green ideas. What is the lifetime of these wall plants, for instance, in the Genesis building, and how much can active trending do they need, particularly in terms of irrigation? That one's for you, Paul.
Okay, yes. So in terms of the Genesis building then, I mean, in terms of the plants, that the maintenance program is that basically they need checking up on every few months, and they need at least one good kind of cut, depending on what plant species are put in them, at least once a year. So as Tom said, there can be quite a high maintenance cost, particularly when we don't necessarily have local companies to do that. So we need to upskill and train local companies so that they can do that. We're not dragging them halfway across the country, because effectively it is just like tending your garden, but obviously on a vertical surface in the case of the living walls. So there's a little bit more of an access issue there, but in terms of tending the plants, it's just the same. Providing the construction is appropriate, then the living wall will go on as long as that maintenance is kept in place.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Thanks for your question, Eric. A question for Luke really, but also the rest of our panelists. Luke, do you think there's a realistic chance of Plymouth becoming carbon neutral by 2030? And also Ricky has pointed us to the climate clock, which I just had a quick look at. And apparently we've now got 6 years and 324 days on the clock. What's your opinion on that? And to the rest of the panelists as well.
It's a good question. The climate clock depends on how you're counting your carbon, of course, and it's the International Committee on Climate Change that says roughly we've got just less than 10 years. But whether it's 7 years, 6 years or 10 years, we do require much heavier lifting now. The difficulty, I think, where we've got to is we might be able to control many more of our externalities as a city by 2030. And the plan that the City Council has in response to the climate emergency declaration that they made a wee while ago is actually quite good. It's one of the best for local government, and it's never popular to praise local government. It's not a fashionable thing that people do, but actually we've got quite a good council in Plymouth, and they've got some really good plans, not only in that carbon response, but also in the Plymouth plan for trees and in the other actions that they're taking to deal with green travel, for instance. But my danger, I think, about how that works is when people and companies are saying we can achieve stuff by 2030, I want us to achieve it by 2030. But what I want to do is to reduce the carbon or have it properly offset within the locality or within the business model, not rely on market bought carbon offsets to basically game the results, because I'm very skeptical about carbon offset markets and about the actual carbon saving that you're buying when you buy a carbon offset. There are some really good projects that are world leading, that are doing a great job, but I'm curious about the rest of it. And that's one of the reasons why I think the stuff that we heard from Loveday about seagrasses, well, if that can be scaled up to be a commercially exploited opportunity, then the ability for people to buy their offsets onto British seagrass, I think is incredibly exciting, because then we can keep the money in our community, we can keep that creating jobs locally, and we have a better chance, I think, of that being delivered. But that will require each and every one of us, I think, to hit 2030 to do some things differently. But it will require government to speed up the policies around diesel and electric cars, getting rid of engines and incentivizing the replacement of old ones with EVs, rollout of EV charging points, and dealing with the fact that our biggest carbon emissions as a city come from our buildings, and that means massive retrofit. And at the moment, if anyone's tried to claim for retrofit costs through the government scheme, well, it's a bit like banging your head against a wall. It's really good when it stops, but you're not going to easily get there. And that is the wrong way, the wrong process to incentivize property owners, commercial, residential or otherwise, to take those steps that are going to be upfront and expensive, but yield long-term results for their bills and the planet.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, totally agree with you there. Any thoughts on the other panelists?
Just like to say, I don't think that we should underestimate the challenge that that organisations have got in reaching net zero carbon. I think in particular, when you break it down and you think about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, i.e. the energy that's used directly in the business or organisation, then there are opportunities there. But the scope 3, the embodied carbon from the products that we get from all over the world, that is very difficult to reduce. And I mean, in some ways I am in favour of offsets when they've got to the point where every other means has been taken. And then, of course, that money can allow projects to go ahead, like the seagrass bed projects planting or peatland restoration on Dartmoor, or tree planting that wouldn't go ahead otherwise, and allow that kind of income to flow.
Thank you, Paul. We have a question here from Amelia from Plymouth City Council, actually. Do you guys know any good published guidance or design guides on green walls that they can use at Plymouth City Council to help encourage developers to integrate them more into their designs? What would your advice be on that?
In my reference list, I had some good maybe I'll tap that into the chat actually, but I've got a good one on biophilic design so that it'll go direct.
That'd be great. Thank you, Paul. A question to you, Tom, from Peter in the chat. So do current older buildings have to have the structural capacities, i.e. weights, to hold the roof gardens to be retrofitted? And also, are there any funding streams available for roof gardens? And he's thinking, I think this is quite good. Maybe you can help with this, Paul. Luke, he's thinking of Derriford Hospital with its 12 balconies that are no longer deemed safe for people to use, but could be made for hanging gardens. That's a really good idea. Quite like that.
Yeah, so in terms of weights, I'm not quite sure on the weight requirements, but I think it really depends on your system. So the benefits of some systems are they're going to be really quite lightweight. So the one that the university uses is, I think it relies on 40 kilograms per square meter, which is not really that too much actually in terms of your capacity. So in terms of funding streams, I mean, I think I can't really answer that well at the moment. I think there's something that perhaps I'll look up and get back to you on. It'd be great if there was. I think that is, we're talking about the challenges, and it is the financial at the end of the day. So yeah, we need to increase them, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom.
There was a great point about Derriford. I would just say, I think that the real prize to be won at Derriford is getting green solutions into what they call their HIP 2 project, which is the building new hospital buildings there, because actually it is in the design of those where I think we can make some of the biggest improvements. Retrofitting public buildings is quite painful for a million one very, very difficult reasons. However, it's a really good question, and next time I'm up at the hospital, I will challenge them with that.
Thanks, Luke. That's really good. Thank you. Another one from Ricky, probably to Paul and Tom. Are there any disadvantages of using living walls? Isn't it like damp from the roots, for example?
Yes, so generally people probably had experience with climbers and creepers on the outside of their house that have grown up and caused problem, particularly with our way we build buildings in Plymouth area with render. But that's a situation where the building's not really designed to have that. So providing you've got an appropriate gap and an appropriate blocks on the materials, whether it's sitting on the roof or in the wall, then that should prevent any damage from roots, which could be an issue. So it needs to be designed appropriately, and an air gap helps insulation, but it also helps to isolate the plants from the actual wall structure itself.
Thank you, Paul. Question for Loveday. Will there be an opportunity for university conservation students to help with the seagrass project, planting or assist in the lab?
That's a brilliant question. We are always looking for help. Current restrictions mean that this is difficult. So obviously the dreaded C word holding us back there. But hopefully in the not too distant future, we will be looking for a lot of volunteers. We've just planted up 1,335 bags in our lab, which sounds like a big number. The goal is 30,000. And there's only so many bags a handful of us within the NMA can actually plant and tie. So certainly, yes, absolutely, yes, please. We are looking for as much help as possible to get these bags tied. We're hoping to make it a public event as soon as we're ready to welcome people back into the National Marine Aquarium to help, but volunteers are always helpful. We're also always looking for diver help as well, because when we plant these bags, some of them will be thrown into the ocean, well, thrown, strong word, gently lowered into the ocean to sink to the seabed and grow. We are hoping to use dive teams to actually pin some of the bags into the seabed. So if we've got any keen divers out there, they're always welcome to come and help as well, and I can provide contact details after this or in the chat if necessary.
Yeah, if you could put them in the chat, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you very much. Question for you, Paul. Can green walls be used for urban food production at all? Are there any current examples?
Yeah, so this is something we spoke about at the university, and certainly we've got other projects that are looking at particularly producing medicinal plants. And one of the problems is that your plant, the primary I suppose one of the first things that green wall needs to be is aesthetically pleasing. So that means that you're looking at evergreen plants that maintain that greenery throughout the year. So quite a lot of our short-lived crop plants in particular would not, and that require that rotation, would not necessarily meet that requirement. But there are certainly some plants that could fulfill both roles and do, but it is tricky.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be great to see some herbs like rosemary, and I think it would be fantastic. So if you're talking about making urban places really nice, you know, it'd be great to have these herbal plants as part of green wall systems. And they're, you know, if we're talking about the multiple benefits, if you can use them for produce and you know, they're making a real impact in terms of thermal benefits, then I think why not? It's just I suppose how you do it. I think there's lots of concerns with potential, you know, litigation. So it's how you do it, but I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Tom. Question for you, Luke, from Hayden. He asks, in the news today, the government is apparently withdrawing hundreds of millions of pounds from the Green Homes Grant Programme. What's your thoughts on this? Is there anything that could be done at all?
Yeah, I think the government has been generally pretty useless in incentivising the right type of housing to be built, and their retrofit programme is poor, as I mentioned earlier. We've Thangam Debonair, who's a Bristol Labour MP, is our shadow housing secretary, and she's been raising questions on that. There is cross-party concern, though, on the government benches as well as on the opposition benches about the housing model that the government is incentivising, because not enough homes are being built that are genuinely affordable, and much of the homes that are being constructed are being built to standards that will require refit in the future, that won't be proper lifetime homes, both in terms of human use, but also in terms of environmental impact. And so there's a lot that needs to be done there. And I think this builds on the kind of like test against delivery message that I said in my main remarks, in the fact that, you know, at a time when we need to have even more house building of an even higher environmental standard, we're actually seeing the opposite coming online. And I think the government's white paper on planning doesn't help us in that regard either, which could well be a new planning bill in the Queen's speech, which we should probably expect in May time. And that's why, actually, regardless of wherever you live, you should be trying to make sure that when there is a concern about going backwards or not going forward fast enough, you don't just keep that concern to yourself. That needs to be shared on socials, that need to be shared with your member of parliament. If it's me, let me know that you're concerned about it. If it's Johnny Mercer or Gary Streeter or anyone else in the region or across the country, let them know as well, because believe me, MPs do take note of what's in their postbag. And when we are seeing a potential for going backwards, it's fine to have different avenues of how you move forwards at pace. But when it's materially negative, I think we need to be raising concerns about that, both for those folks in the public eye like me, but also members of the public as well.
Thank you, Luke. Question to all our panel from Richard. Is now a good time to radically change our concept and judgment of a successful society by embracing things that deliver beauty and happiness?
I'll go first. Yes. Yes, it is. Of course it is. And the horrors of the pandemic have to be replaced with something better at the end of it. But that means we need to look at not only what this means, as because actually quite a lot of the alternatives for GDP as measures of success have a huge bias towards middle class affluence. because it assumes that people have already got a stable housing situation, stable employment situation, stable retirement savings, and things like that. And actually, if we are to replace economic measures with wider happiness, wider environmental benefits, we need to make sure that we're testing those measures to make sure that what we're not doing is just loading more benefits on those people that already have a lot of affluence and ignoring folks at the bottom of the economic ladder, especially in places like Plymouth, where we have enormous numbers of people in living in effectively levels of deprivation that should be unacceptable. Simply moving from an economic measure to something like that is a great way of saying we're not going to assess child poverty anymore, so therefore we don't have child poverty. Now, you will be able to see through that, but sadly the child poverty will still exist whether the stats there or not. So we do need to make sure it has a social justice element to it, but yes, we should be moving in that direction.
Thanks, Luke. Totally agree with you. We're going back to living walls. There's lots of questions coming out of living walls. For this one for you, Paul. Can living walls be integrated in listed buildings, especially as the insulation is often reduced to building standards and single glazed windows?
Yeah, listed buildings are a real challenge, for making change to even our sustainability hub. We had some stonework on the outside of the building that we had to avoid to stop the to prevent it losing that character. So it is really tricky, actually. It's tricky enough with retrofits on buildings that aren't listed.
Thanks, Paul. And we have quite a few questions asking the views between green roofs and green walls. What's the pros and cons between those?
Well, they both have similar kind of pros, I suppose, in terms of the ecosystem services and the benefits that we spoke about. In terms of kind of fitting, I suppose the roof requires a kind of stronger specification. People spoke about the weight and also making sure that it's watertight. But of course, maintenance is easier. We don't necessarily get to see the roofs unless we are occupying the roof space, I suppose, unless you're flying over them. So I suppose from a street level point of view, the actual walls are more impactful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's probably actually maybe there's a room for complementing. I think it has to be either or. There's potential for having rain gardens in roofs that feed potentially green walls. So yeah.
A question for all of our panel from Helen. In what ways can greening our environment be implemented into small domestic projects? Many companies will only supply green roofs and walls to large projects. Is that the case?
To come in there, I mean, in terms of the work that's been done on well-being, some of that work's just been done on office planting. So having plants in the office, and there are lots of ways that you can incorporate those, and that can be really beneficial. So it doesn't have to be an elaborate living wall. It can be the small things that make all of the difference.
And one for you, Tom, from Steve. Are there any numbers available to give to developers, given the huge amounts of new builds, especially happening at the moment, that they can be approached with? Yeah,
I mean, there's values in the literature which give you an idea. I presume Steve's talking about thermal savings. So there are values, and I showed some of them in the presentation. But there's definitely some considerable literature out there on some of the health benefits and how that knocks on in terms of financial. So the numbers are out there. It's piecing them all together and I suppose making a compelling case, really. So there's some numbers out there. We'd like to get more numbers, really. But I would say that as a scientist. So.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. And I'm afraid we'll have to end it there. I just want to say a big thank you to all our speakers this afternoon. Thank you to Luke Pollard, MP, Loveday Trinick, Paul Lunt and Thomas Murphy. There's just time for me to remind you of our next webinar, which is on the 24th of February at 4 p.m. So please join us for that. Go to Future Plymouth 2030 to get your place. And we'll see you next time. Thanks very much, guys. Bye-bye.